The Night Train. Written and read by RedBadandy. There it is again. I hear the sound of the train once more. Am I really awake, or is this another nightmare? I sit upright in a cold sweat and ask myself, is it that train? Or just an innocent passenger, a cargo train? They can't all be like that one. I know they can't. But I look at the clock and see that the time is 2 a.m., same time as that night, and I shudder at the prospect. I get up and lock my doors just in case, and at that point I decided to write down what I know and leave this account to anyone who will listen and take heed. Who am I? I am nobody, just someone who saw too much, but no one believes just what it is that I saw, or at least no one wants to. To start, this is first and foremost a warning to any of you who live near railroads. There is a train that came through my town that harbors a dark secret, a secret I would never have found out about if not for a series of freak accidents that led to me and my friend getting stuck on that nightmare carrion train. These events that took place, for me at least, succeeded in removing the veil between the sane world and a realm of human nightmare that is even now still painfully present when I close my eyes or hear the peal of those damn train horns. I live in a quiet Midwestern town of little note. I will not disclose where, but suffice to say there are hundreds across the country that feature once prominent, though now somewhat dilapidated railroads that drive through the towns. In fact, you may live in one as well. My town is much like these others, and I shudder when I imagine the same train driving through all of these other towns at night and partaking in the morbid business those ghouls indulge in. I will tell in detail what happened that night, and hopefully you will understand, or maybe even believe me. You will know that if you ever see that nightmare train in your town, you and everyone you care about will stay as far away as you can until it leaves back down the infernal rails that return it to the hell from whence it came. It was almost a month ago now. My best friend Dave and I were at a local pub on Saturday evening. We were having a good time and getting a little hammered. It was just about closing time, and fortunately both Dave and I lived close, so we could get completely smashed and still shamble back home without fear of needing transportation. We paid our tabs and staggered out the door, laughing and joking and generally being obnoxious to the few people we encountered on the couple blocks we had made it this far. Oh shit! Dave blurted out as he tripped over a bump in the sidewalk and fell forward, barely catching himself before landing on his face. Watch where you're going, drunkie! I yelled at him. I was laughing and staggering to avoid a misstep as well. We carried on down the street a bit further when we heard the horn of a train in the distance and heard the ding-ding-ding of the railroad crossing alarm sounding off. Oh, god damn it, man. Stuck waiting for the train, Dave said in an exasperated groan. Oh, really? And what, pray tell, are you in a hurry to get home at this hour? Late for your dinner date with your sock and a hustler? I chuckled loudly at my own joke as Dave giggled and said, For your information, I still have to watch my horror movie this weekend. He continued, saying that I have to watch a horror movie every week this year for my film club. I know I will not want to watch it tomorrow, so it's got to be tonight. Ugh, this damn train. He dropped down to the ground to wait with his head in his hands. Don't be dramatic, I told him. These ones at night are fairly quick. Though as if to prove me a liar, the train in question slowed down to a crawl, and to our surprise and annoyance stopped completely, blocking off the way forward and who knows how many crossroads up or down either direction to get around it. Do you ever get tired of being wrong? Dave asked with a wry grin, looking up at me. I had successfully put my foot in my mouth. I paused for a brief moment, unbelieving of crappy luck, and muttered out a quick, Shut up, you bastard, and sat down next to him to wait for the trains to get a move on. As we waited, we heard a rustling of plastic bags and the soft patter of taped-up shoes getting closer. As we expected, we soon saw Jonesy shuffle up to us. Spare some change, fellas, he said, holding out his hand. Fresh out, Jonesy. Sorry, we blew most of the old discretionary fund on booze tonight, I told him, chuckling, though feeling slightly guilty now, since I knew he was on hard times, and normally when sober and passing by on work days, I would try and contribute what I could to him or any of his friends who lived in the homeless camp nearby. He nodded and waved to us politely as he continued down the sidewalk toward the parked train. I wondered if he was going to try and see if anyone on board might be willing to give anything. Maybe they might be able to spare something from a dining car. That is, if one had a dining car, I thought. Thinking about that made me take greater notice of the train that had parked. It was odd. It was jet black, not a light gray like an Amtrak, but looked like it was some sort of passenger train. It was also fairly large for a passenger train, and I took notice of the fact that it appeared to be missing any sort of brand name or company logo indicating who owned and operated it. It seemed very strange that it would be stopping here when I knew that it was not on a main route stop for another 15 miles or so up the line. As I pondered the weird train, looking harder for any indication of what line this was, I heard a door open a little further up the line. A moment later, there was a muffled sound like something hitting the rail and a train door slamming shut. "Hey, man," Dave said. "Did you see that?" "See what?" I asked. "Jonesy, man. It looked like he fell on the track and someone grabbed him and pulled him up onto the train," Dave said with a sudden tinge of concern in his voice. I tried to calm him down. "No one would pull him on. You don't think maybe he or his friends tried to sneak onto the train to get some food?" I said defensively, mostly because I hadn't seen anything since I was too distracted and didn't want to admit my ignorance. "Nah, man, you didn't see? Someone straight up grabbed him, pulled him on board, and shut the door really quick," Dave insisted, his drunk and cocky demeanor shifting to one of legitimate concern. I paused and tried to see if I could see anything, but it seemed very still now. Movement could still be heard in the train cars, but no one seemed to be out at this junction. As well as we looked around and noticed that Jonesy's friends, who normally followed him, were also absent. We each moved cautiously closer to the train. I tried to strain my ears to hear anything inside over the hum of the still-running engine. Dave moved closer to where he had seen Jonesy, and we both listened. It felt like ages in the odd stillness of the night, but it was broken by what sounded like a muffled scream that was cut off by a disturbing thump, and then a large-sounding object hitting a padded floor. I held my breath and looked over at Dave, and I knew he had heard it too. "What the hell, man?" He tried to whisper, but a frenzied panic was creeping into his voice, causing it to rise. "I heard it too," I said, struggling to figure out what to do next. Before I could decide on what I was going to do, Dave had moved all the way over to where the train door was, where he had seen Jonesy get pulled up into it, and was pulling on it to try and open it. I gasped and ran up to him as quickly and quietly as I could. "What are you doing, Dave?" I hissed out at him. "You don't know what the hell these people are, or what they're capable of." He looked back at me and was about to say something when the door swung open, and an arm reached down toward him with what appeared to be a close-range taser in it. Before Dave could utter a word, he was convulsing in shock and slumped down to the ground. I held my breath to stifle a scream, and instead dropped down low to the ground as I saw a huge man in a black overcoat drop down on the ground next to him and produce something from his coat. As Dave tried to push himself up from the ground, the figure bent down and looked to have stabbed something in his neck. Dave appeared to go limp. He grabbed Dave and threw him over his shoulder and jumped back onto the train and slammed the door shut again. "Holy shit!" I nearly shouted aloud, but thought better of it. "They took him! They took Dave and they took Jonesy as well, and all his friends most likely. What the hell is going on with this train?" I thought, terrified and confused. I couldn't just leave them, but I didn't know if I had the courage to try and go after them. I grabbed my cell phone and was about to call the police, when to my horror the train started moving again. They were leaving and taking them all away, I thought in panic. I realized I had no information to offer law enforcement on the other line, just an unidentified black train. No one could find them with that, so I made the decision then and there, the first great mistake of that night. I decided to jump aboard that damnable train and try to find Dave and Jonesy and see what horrors awaited me inside. The car I had snuck into was terribly dark. I instinctively reached for my phone for a light, then panicked as I realized I must have dropped it when I jumped aboard. I sat in hushed silence as the train gathered speed, trying my best to blend in and cling to the wall so in case someone shuffled by in the darkness, they wouldn't bump into me. I knew it was a horrible idea, but I couldn't just let these maniacs kidnap my friends. Once I felt steady enough and the train was fully moving again, I sidled the wall up to where I saw some light coming through a window. As I crept closer, the background started to appear more with an incoming light. It appeared to transition from a dark generic car to some sort of storage car. I saw people organizing various objects and what looked like clothes and other items at 2 tables on each wall of the train car. I leaned forward and caught a look over the shoulder of the man on the left table and thought I saw a crudely patched up jacket that looked remarkably like Jonesy's. I heard some mumbling about dinner time and posh goons by the man at the table. I almost fell backwards when a bell rings and a voice speaks into the cargo car, and the 2 men organizing the items promptly leave through the opposite door. I waited a moment to make sure no one else was going to enter. Then I cautiously slid the door open and crept inside. In the cargo car, there were heaps of disorganized effects: clothes, wallets, cell phones, but weirdly very few actual suitcases. I wondered if maybe these guys were going through the passengers' luggage and stealing things. However, that would be pretty brazen considering they could have just taken the bags and run. Why organize all this stuff here? I considered. I continued poking around and saw that one pile contained a large amount of people's IDs, and I stifled a gasp when I saw near the top was Dave's, sitting there along with what looked like dozens, if not hundreds, of others. What the hell is going on here? I said aloud, wondering what had happened with my friend, and indeed with all these other people. I grabbed his ID and cautiously walked up to the next door that the 2 men had gone through, and tried to look through the glass and see anything. The next car appeared to have cattle-style pens or cages, and I suppressed an audible gasp when I saw what appeared to be the form of dozens of naked figures lying in the cages in various degrees of consciousness. I didn't know what to do. I was shocked and horrified. Was this some sort of human trafficking operation? I thought to myself, almost not noticing the figure emerging into the prison car from the other side. I ducked lower so I couldn't be seen through the glass as a large individual wearing a butcher's apron came into the room. He fumbled with some keys on his belt, mumbling something under his breath that I couldn't hear, and opened a pen. There was an unconscious man in the pen, and he grabbed him by the hair, and before he could let out a groan of protest, he had smashed his head in with what looked like some sort of mallet. I had to hold my hands in front of my mouth to not gasp aloud, and I felt sick and horrified when the figure pulling the body a bit closer to an overhead light and throwing him limply over his shoulder gave enough of a glimpse to show that it was the now devastated body of Jonesy that he held. The large man took Jonesy's now possibly dead body into the next car, and I collapsed down to the ground by the door in the car I was hiding in. Holy shit! Holy shit! I kept muttering to myself as I was trying to come to grips with what I just saw. They killed him. That has to have killed him. What can I do? I had no idea where we were. I had no idea what was going on. These psychopaths were kidnapping people, not just taking them, but killing them. I had to find Dave and get off this train. I was considering what, if anything, I could do here. I could not indeed tell anyone where the hell here was at the moment. So far, all the train cars I had been in were either windowless or heavily shuttered, so no glimpse of the outside was even available. Never mind, it was closing in on 3 a.m., and it was pitch black out in the cold night. A slamming sound from the door opposite to the one I was standing near disrupted my thoughts, as I fell into the corner to hide behind a large box with discarded coats and clothes on it. Another figure entered the train car. I didn't know what they were here for, but I knew I had to move, so I summoned my courage, and when the figure dropped a large box full of various objects onto the table and began sorting things, I took my chance and slowly slid the door to the prison car open and managed to close it just in time as the figure at the table looked up and back, possibly hearing the door close, but mercifully not investigating it. It was freezing here, and I slowly moved along in a crouch, passing by cells with people laying down in the cages in dazed confusion. No one was speaking, and indeed most were barely conscious, if at all. I saw one huddled figure fall forward, reaching toward the bars when I approached. Fortunately, they didn't cry out, and that's when I realized they couldn't. The person was missing a tongue. I fell back in shock as they gurgled some sort of cry for help, and the eyes spoke of God knows what sort of bodily torture they had endured. I had to try to find some way of freeing these people, but I had no idea how. Each cage had a large, durable-looking padlock on it. I looked above the cage, and I saw that they also had dates and a bodily diagram of the person inside. I looked closer at the diagram and saw that various parts of the bodies were highlighted red as taken, and saw what appeared to be a sort of expiration date on each one. The most uncomfortable part was it said, "Use by." I felt immensely guilty, but I looked down one last time at the beseeching eyes of the figure in the cage and moved along the other ones. The pain and dismemberment appeared to not be unique to the previous individual. People were missing tongues, eyes, arms, legs, and appeared poorly stitched back up like the amputations were deliberate. Each time on each cage there was a use-by date with highlighted portions of what was taken. The crowning horror was what I saw next. On the wall near the other door I hadn't come through was what appeared to be instructions, something like what a butcher or meat processor might follow. It mentioned ways to remove cuts with care and that too much bruising or spoilage would decrease the quality. The last line stated the mandate that our customers pay for premium quality and for discretion. Remember that you will be well compensated. Forget that and you will be on the menu. We don't tolerate failures, but we can still serve them. What the hell are these people doing? Some sort of black market organ or body harvesting operation going on here? I thought as I looked back at the human carnage and despair on display. My mind was reeling and I couldn't figure out what to do next. The decision was made for me when I once again had to duck into the shadows, this time hiding near a pile of discarded bloody aprons as the door slid open. I heard the bell ring and a PA system announce that dinner would be soon and that all selections must be made in the next 10 minutes so that the culinary staff had time to prepare the specific selections. Then a much less friendly but local chime that might just be in this car or the adjacent cars loudly warned the staff to hurry up with the processing so that the cooks could get to work. Cooks, I thought. I paused and reeled at the implication. Oh my God, no, there's no way. I almost said aloud, but checked myself as a large man came into the room, and a smaller man pulling a dolly came in through the other door. This one's bad. I don't know who pulled it, but we don't need more bums or other dregs. Tell acquisitions to put a little more effort into it. The customers are not paying for this garbage. And he practically threw a body at the other man, who fumbled to catch it and place it on the dolly like a morbid makeshift gurney. I once again suppressed a horrified gasp as I saw the body of Jonesy, stiff as a board and dead now, his throat slashed and various parts of his torso, arms, and legs missing. The large man grumbled as Jonesy's body was carted back the other way. They don't pay me enough for this shit. Now we have to pick off one of the cleaner ones. He wiped a bloody hand on his apron and proceeded to stomp towards an empty cage and let out a sigh and a curse. He reached into his pocket and produced a radio and opened a channel. This is Berg in prep. There's been an escape. There was a brief pause and he said, Yeah, the new one. Try not to spoil it. They can't have gotten too far. Escaped? Was that Dave? Maybe he got out of his cell. I needed to find him. I felt a glimmer of hope, but it was snatched away when I leaned forward to check and see if the large man was leaving, and saw a bloody apron land near the place I was hiding behind. A large hand seized my throat and hoisted me upright and off the ground, choking and gasping for air. You are new. How did you get here without going through processing? The hulking man asked, his breath and body reeking of fresh blood and body odor. Never mind. You'll make up for that bad one, and possibly the missing one if we have to kill it. Hold still. This will only take a second. He was holding the hammer in his other hand and leveling a blow at my head, all the while strangling the life out of me with his insane strength. Just then there was a wet cutting sound, and I saw the tip of a jagged blade sticking through the giant man's throat. I felt his grip slacken, and I fell back, gasping for air. I looked on as the man fell forward, and saw a strange woman still holding the blood-caked metal. She looked frenzied and lethal as she looked down at the man who almost killed me, yet also terrified in her own right. Come on, we have to go, she whispered, holding out a hand to me. Who are you? What the hell is going on this train? I asked, venting some of my own terror and confusion. Name's Tasha. We have to leave. My friends are all dead. They took them, cut them up, ate them. We don't have time for this. I stole a passkey to the dining car, where the only emergency exits is. We have to go now. Ate them? I said aloud as my morbid suspicion was confirmed. I needed to find Dave and get the hell out of here. I need to find my friend before we go, I pleaded with the strange woman. If he's not here, he's dead, or worse, she said bluntly. I am leaving now with or without you. We have one chance to try while they're changing up the guards for the search. We'll probably still get caught, but we have to try. I would rather jump out and die than be fed to those bastards. I followed her wordlessly and in confused terror as we moved through 2 more cars of cages and prep stations, as they called them. The next car was a large kitchen, and there were dozens of people busy at work cooking and preparing what I knew were the horrifying meals of the ghoulish patrons. "We can't sneak in. We have to belong," she said, going over to a side wall and pressing an overhead panel which fell down and dropped several kitchen outfits on the ground. "I was going to try to use these to escape with my friends, but you're the only sane, intact, and conscious other person here, so it's now or never." She threw a larger attendant uniform at me and a small hat as well. I didn't know if this crazy plan would work, but we had no other choice. We quickly and quietly changed, just in time to have another kitchen attendant walk in and demand to know where the scallops were. I looked on, fumbling for words, when Tasha quickly blurted out, "We're getting them now, as fast as we can. Please apologize to the chef for the inconvenience. Supply did not properly organize the herbs and vegetables, and should be cited for it." "Very good. Please hurry, though. Monsieur Clayton does not like being kept waiting." They promptly returned to the kitchen, and I couldn't believe that it worked. I was just about to congratulate Tasha on the good plan when she found a container of scallops in a nearby cooler and pulled me along, muttering to me a quick, "Just act like you belong. Pretend to follow instructions, but don't stop moving with me through to the next car, no matter what you see." I wondered what she meant by "whatever you see." Then as she pulled me through the door, I saw. The whole kitchen was a nightmare of human body parts mixed with the mundane ingredients common to cooking. The contrast between the generic prep work of broths, sauces, and vegetables was horrifying when seeing entire body parts of humans processed and integrated as the protein in every dish. I felt like I was going to be sick. I covered my mouth but tried not to react too much in order to maintain appearances. We made it halfway through when I was forced to pause for a moment, since other people were in our way, and I was given a dish. I looked at Tasha for unspoken instruction, and she glanced at me out of the corner of her eye and did a quick nod, as I noticed she was holding a tray as well. The throng of chefs and kitchen staff slowly pushed out as our table numbers were yelled at us after handing the dishes, and we stumbled out into an opulent dining car. My eyes strained at the sudden burst of light and the gleam of gilded frescoes, bright mirrors, and artwork on the walls, brilliant polished silverware, and the low murmur of dinner conversations ongoing. No one seemed to notice or care as we shuffled out into the walkway. All the diners were dressed in fine clothes and appeared to be wearing masquerade-style domino masks, and it made sense why, as any patrons would want anonymity when partaking of such perverse activity as this. We walked slowly and carefully down the aisle, holding our trays upright and carefully. I did my best not to look at the meals the people were happily consuming. I shuddered at the clatter of forks and knives and the scraping, biting, and chewing of the morbid feasts these sick ghouls were partaking in. I paused momentarily and considered the tray I was carrying. I made the mistake of looking at the soup on the fine platter I was holding. It was some sort of creamy bisque, and it had been finely prepared fingerling potatoes to go with what appeared to be actual human fingers, boiled but not burned, flesh predominantly still intact. I felt queasy and thought I might be sick. Then my nausea turned to hopeless horror and terror when I saw a glint in the soup near the knuckle. I was confused, so I reached in and turned it over and saw a 2014 Division Championship ring. Dave never once took off his ring after his high school football team had won the championship that year, and the realization struck me like a physical blow. I looked on in complete horror as I saw what I now realized was a soup with what was likely parts of Dave in it. I gasped, and I was bumped by an impatient server who was behind me, and I dropped the bowl, the fine tray, and likely the corporeal remains of my friend to the ground. Soup splashed everywhere, and several patrons glared at us, contempt and anger plain on their masked faces. Tasha looked back at me with a pained expression on her face. I tried to mouth an apology, but she promptly looked back to the other server and started shouting at him. "Look what you did, you impatient bastard! Clean this up now!" She continued and looked around and said, "Please accept our apologies, everyone. This is below the fine standards that you and all the other patrons in this fine establishment expect." A brief but hateful hint of angry sarcasm managed to color her words, even as the patrons resumed their conversation and morbid meals. All except one, who rose and got out to the main aisle and approached me. "I assume you are the reason I will not be enjoying my bisque this evening?" he said indignantly. "I am a well-paying customer and regular here. I will have your name and ID, and make sure you are punished for wasting my meal." I've already been waiting for almost an hour, and this lack of discipline and service with what we are paying is unacceptable. I had a decision to make as I stood there looking at that masked piece of shit, complaining to me that I dropped the goddamn soup that was made out of my best friend. I could do the smart thing, which was to play along and avoid suspicion. Or I could do something stupid and impulsive based on my emotions I was feeling at the time. I barely wasted another second to decide. I made one apologetic glance to Tasha, stooped low to grab the serving tray, and then as the bastard was about to repeat himself, I swung it around and smashed the platter into his face. There was a sickening crunch, and he fell back with a ruined, bleeding face and shattered nose. He started screaming and protesting, but I leaned forward and proceeded to stomp his ruined face twice more, until he shut up, either knocked out or dead. I didn't care which. There was an explosion of motion as diners shrieked and leapt up from their chairs, cursing at us, and in some cases literally clutching their pearls. Kitchen staff were piling out of the car to investigate the commotion, and two black-coated men with dark glasses and earpieces were coming into the dining car from the next exit. "Move!" Tasha shouted at me, and she moved forward towards the security men and pushed my head down in order to have clearance to throw her own tray at the security guards approaching. It hit them head-on and caught one guard, and she ran forward and managed to stab one of them in the gut with her improvised blade that she still had on her. The other recovered and caught her and knocked her off her feet with a side elbow, and her head rebounded off the wall of the train car. There was pandemonium for a moment that felt like ages, as I had to act to do something and help. I bent down and hurled the silver bowl that had dropped to the ground, and it struck the other guard in the head right as he was bending down to electrocute Tasha with a hand taser. I scrambled forward and managed to create enough momentum to lean forward with a powerful front kick that drove the guard into the wall with a satisfying smash. I helped Tasha to her feet as I dodged a clumsy strike by the man who had been stabbed. I grabbed her and rolled out of the room by the still-open door as a knife hurled by one of the chefs missed us by a hair, and the guards fumbled in their coats for what looked like firearms. I turned back and slammed the door closed, sealing off the chaos and commotion of the dining car, and was relieved to see a large bolt on the door. I quickly fastened the lock to grant us a moment of security. That security was soon threatened when I heard a large crashing and ramming, and knew they were trying to break the door down to get at us. "We have to go now," Tasha wheezed out a response, still out of wind from the vicious blow she suffered. "We can't, we're still moving. We need to stop the train," I cried out in protest. She winced and continued. "Too late, we have to go now." She got up slowly to her feet and took the key, and moved up to a large sliding panel on the wall. Upon inserting the key, it slid back, and there was a train car door, which swung to the side and revealed the dark night flying past us at frightening speed. The train was driving over an elevated area of forest, and below us trees and cliffsides shined with jagged and brilliant light under the moon. The drop looked lethal, and I swallowed hard, knowing what the likely chances of survival would be from this height. We didn't have time to discuss it or consider alternatives. The door behind us started to break apart, and we knew they would be on us soon. "There's worse things than death," Tasha said as she smiled at me and hurled herself out of the speeding train. "No, wait!" was all I could shout back when I saw her hit the ground and tumble over and over. The landing looked bad, but how could it not with how fast the train was going? I was terrified, but finally spurred into action by the sounds of gunfire and heard a bullet smash into the door panel right by where I was standing. I didn't pause again. I jumped. My eyes opened again as I gasped for air. There was a terrible pain in my head and arm, and my back was on fire, but somehow I survived the fall. I felt my right arm and knew it was broken. I might have a concussion as well, but I was alive. My head was bleeding, and I felt woozy getting to my feet. My left knee was cut up and bruised badly, but I was able to walk. I didn't know where to go, but I thought of the possible dangers still present if the train had stopped. Fortunately, I didn't see it on the tracks. I didn't know if they would try to catch us, but maybe they couldn't stop in time to try to follow. Or maybe they didn't care about some escaped meat, I thought grimly. Perhaps they knew no one would believe a story like this, and they didn't care to even try to recapture us. Whatever the case was, I didn't know for sure. Neither did I know how long I was out for. But they were not here now, and that's what mattered. I staggered to my feet and walked in the direction I thought was back along the tracks, near where Tasha had fallen. I stumbled around for a long time, but finally found something in the dark near the edge of a steep slope leading down from the tracks, and my heart sank. It was Tasha. She was there, laying splayed out on the ground, a large puddle of blood near her head from where she had smashed it on nearby stones. I bent down to check on her. There was no heartbeat, no pulse. She was dead. I leaned forward and cradled her head. I didn't even really know her, but she had helped me escape that horrific train, and she'd been killed on the precipice of freedom. I sat there with her, crying to her and to myself about the horrors of our experience for a while. After some time, I stood up, and despite my ravaged body and my ruined arm, I began stacking rocks and doing my best to bury what remained of her, rock by rock. I don't know how long it took, but the sun was peeking through the clouds at this point, so it must have been early morning. I tried to leave a path as I walked away from her, onto whatever was in that direction, but her remains were never discovered again. I walked for what felt like an entire other day, almost collapsing from exhaustion before I finally reached the outskirts of some little town. I staggered onto a street and collapsed nearby a rural bus stop, and someone driving by stopped their car to check on me. I was so dehydrated I could barely speak, but they took me to an ER, and from there I had a chance to recover a bit. The police were brought in to see what had happened, and I told them the truth. I had fallen off a train. They were suspicious since I don't know if they thought I was a vagrant and had been riding on the train legally. I told them I was taken on the train against my will, and that others were also, but they rolled their eyes, and I knew they thought I was some sort of crazy train hobo making up stories to avoid getting locked up. Fortunately, they didn't press the subject, and I was able to leave the hospital without criminal charges. Unfortunately, it had also begun a pattern with my attempts at trying to get law enforcement involved. In this, they left without any indication that an investigation would take place to try and see what happened, or to try to catch the psychopaths operating that horrible train. I was still in bad shape, but once I left, I managed to figure out where I was and eventually got a ride back to my hometown, which was nearly 120 miles away from where I was. I got home uneventfully, and since then I have tried to look up other accounts of the train and people going missing, but nothing concrete has ever been established, just rumors and secondhand accounts. Dave was declared as missing when he dropped off contact with his family. Felt horrible because I knew what they did and that he was never coming back. As I stated before, I write this account now as a warning to anyone who will listen. I don't know who those people were or how far their influence spreads, but please be careful around any suspicious trains at night. I'm sure they're still out there kidnapping people and serving them to their horrific patrons. I can't prove it, but I know. I lived it. I hope to God none of you have to live through it too, or you may wish that you hadn't. I need to double check the locks again. It's going to be a long night. There seems to be a lot of trains coming and going tonight in particular. Be safe and take care.